America cannot tell the truth about herself. If the history of this country were written, you would have to say that this country is a nation of thieves. It began by stealing this country from the red man. If I said to you that Christopher Columbus discovered America in 1492, you would say that's correct. But now here come this honky from Spain. There are already non-white people here, and they're not existing until he comes and discovers them. Ain't that all their heroes have been white. They make you bow down to George Washington as your hero. Did they ever tell you that that honky owned slaves? Did he ever tell you that? Yeah. Not only did he own slaves, he sold a black woman for a barrel of molasses, and he's supposed to be our hero. Our hero.
To see the majority of the black African American community say nothing and not want to inform themselves, to say nothing.
Well, do you think there's a little bit of a risk in sort of, I mean, a couple of times you're referencing the genocide of the Jews to slavery. Seems like a little bit of a slippery slope there, no?
I don't even know how we can say that, actually, and I say that as a Jew. Have you read up much on slavery?
Yeah.
We're talking abject slavery, Dave. I mean, nobody's in a contest. Nobody has a monopoly on human suffering. If you started slavery in 1619 and you had 2.5 years, 2.5 centuries, and then at the end there were 4 to 5 million enslaved people, do you realize generation after generation how many millions of people we're talking about?
Right. Well, I'm not diminishing that, but you can also talk about the extermination of 6 million people and the amount of people that never lived because of that would be alive. Or your ancestors from Russia who were never given anything and came here.
But the Germans had paid reparations. That's kind of my point. The fact that Germany paid reparations, Germany has done full on mea culpa. Germany has done full on mea culpa, plus reparations, plus a guarantee that every generation theretofore would receive full Holocaust education. That's kind of my point. They cleaned it up. And the fact that it doesn't mean that they can make the Holocaust not have happened, but it has had a tremendous moral, psychological, and emotional effect reconciling Germany with the Jews of Germany and the rest of Europe. That's what reparations do. It is just like in a personal relationship. All that a nation is a group of people. So the same psychological and emotional and spiritual principles that prevail within the journey of an individual prevail within the journey of a nation. If you or I wronged each other, somebody was going to need to apologize in order for us to clean it up. And not only that,
well, but if you or I, but that's different than the collective nature.
But it's not. That's my point. Now, if you believe it's different than the collective, then you're right. But if you don't believe it's different than the collective,
right, so that might just, okay, so that just might be a fundamental difference, and that's fine. I mean, I don't think I'm guilty of the past of anyone else.
This is not about guilt. It's a difference between taking guilt and responsibility. There's a difference. If you have a company that takes over another company, you inherit their assets and you inherit their debts. And so America inherited the debts of the South. And also there was a lot of, systemic racism that wasn't just in the South either. You know, after World War II, the German chancellors and prime ministers, there was a lot of apologizing that went on. And you know something else? There was a pope around 3 popes ago, I think his name was John Paul. He coined a phrase which I thought was so brilliant: purification of memory. And he said, if you do not apologize for what he called a sin in your past, then you remain unconscious of the ways you repeated in the future. Now, in terms of cash versus not, there is atonement and there is amends. If you look at something like the Principles of Alcoholics Anonymous, you atone, but you make amends where possible. If you stole $1,000 from me, and then you came up to me and said, Marianne, I am so sorry that I stole that $1,000 from you, I would feel, I really appreciate your apology, and I'd also like my cash back. So the idea of making an amends in addition to atonement is the way you truly close the circle of reconciliation.
Right.
White people broke the earth. White people, not all of you individually, but the systems you built, the empires you enforced, the profit you prioritized over life. You broke the earth. You didn't just show up and settle. You came with guns, greed, and God. You took land that wasn't yours, spilled blood on sacred ground, and called it destiny. You clear-cut forests, enslaved people, dug holes in the earth for gold, turned the sky into a smokestack, and renamed the destruction growth. You made the land yours by force. You made water something to sell. You made civilization mean white skin, private property, and concrete. You told the world that nature was wild, that people who honored it were savages, and that domination was salvation. And when the earth cried out, when her lungs burned and her rivers turned black, you didn't stop. You invented new ways to profit from collapse. Now you want to fix it? Now you want to lead the way? No, you are not the solution. You are the crisis. But this story doesn't end with you, because the earth is not dead, not defeated. It is wounded, but it remembers. It remembers those who loved it before you fenced it off, and mined its soul. It remembers the songs sung to rivers, the hands that planted with gratitude, the fire keepers, the medicine carriers, the people who knew the earth was not a thing, but a living relative. We remember too. We remember that your empires are fragile, that your borders are fake, that your wealth is stolen, and that your time is running out. The earth can be healed, but not by white saviors, not by carbon offsets, not by policies written in boardrooms. Healing will come through justice, through land back, through reparations, through abolition, through the return of what was stolen, and the dismantling of what never should have existed. The earth isn't dying, it's remembering, and it will only heal when white power ends. Cope.
What's up, guys? Welcome back to Trevor Commentaries. Today we are going to take a look at a powerful discussion about the unforgettable and often erased part of American history, especially the experiences of Black Americans. This is not simply a conversation about the past. It's also about understanding how historical decisions can continue to influence communities, opportunities, wealth, education, healthcare, and the justice system today. So guys, let us continue to watch the videos till the end, then I'll be back with more reactions. And please remember to subscribe to the channel.
You have no idea how horrific slavery was. They ate Nat Turner after his execution, boiling his body for oil and turning his remains into souvenirs. Enslaved Africans' hair was used to stuff furniture, including pillows and mattresses, while their teeth were sold as dentures for white wealthy people, including but not limited to George Washington. The skin of the enslaved individual was flayed and turned into leather for shoes and clothing. Pregnant Black women were whipped on their stomachs to induce miscarriages or forced to give birth under inhumane conditions, only to have their infants sold off. Enslaved men and women were subject to brutal medical procedures without anesthesia or consent. Tools like thumb screws and iron muzzles were used to silence them, while branding irons seared their skin with the marks of their enslavers. Rape was weaponized as a tool of control, with enslaved women forced to bear children who were automatically enslaved, perpetuating the cycle. Families were torn apart at auction blocks, with children as young as toddlers sold to distant plantations, never to see their parents again. Even after death, the bodies of enslaved people were desecrated. Their remains were often stolen from graveyards and used for medical dissections or experimentation. Their lives were treated as commodities, and their suffering was systematic, deliberate, and utterly inhumane. Slavery wasn't just a labor system. It was a calculated mechanism of dehumanization, leaving a legacy of cruelty and trauma that reverberates through history to this day. And still, there is no recompense or reparations for the descendants of the enslaved. And the algorithm will probably make it so that most people don't see this video. I wonder why.
Listen to this. Check it out.
Understand now more than ever why white people don't like to learn about Black history, American history. because white America create many of the conditions it now condemns. So you don't get to enslave generations of people, publicly lynch them after Sunday church service, segregate them, strip them of land and wealth, destroy their communities, over-police neighborhoods, flood them with drugs, incarcerate their fathers, underfund their schools, deny them equal protection under the law, and then point out the pain created by those systems and call the people the problem. That is not accountability. That is historical gaslighting. And the audacity of white America to project violence, criminality, and moral failure onto black people while refusing to confront its own history is one of the greatest manipulations this country has ever performed. Because some of the most horrific acts of mankind were committed on American soil. They were not done by the oppressed. They were normalized by the oppressor. Lynchings became family events. Black bodies were burned, tortured, mutilated, bred, sold, violated, experimented on, and discarded while people quoted Bible verses and called it God's will. Entire systems of terror were justified through whiteness, power, colonization, and a man-made interpretation of religion. And the most dangerous lie America ever told was that racism is over simply because the language became more polished. Ruby Bridges is still alive. The descendants of segregationists are still alive. The systems evolved. They did not disappear. So when people say stop blaming the past while actively supporting policies that suppress truth, restrict rights, attack education, control women's bodies, criminalize blackness, divide the poor, and preserve inequality, understand what is really happening. They do not want accountability. They want amnesia. Because racism survives best in a country that pretends.
Here's a story that they don't want me to tell because history books want you to think something totally different. When you read about the Night Riders of the Klan, they think everybody was scared of them. They think that black folks was terrorized and we were run and hide and scream. Let me tell you a little story that you probably never heard of. In 1960, there was a group of black men in Bogalusa, Louisiana. They were military veterans that came home and they went toe-to-toe with the Klan. Never ran. When they protested, they got in their face, went back and forth. They protected the community. These men were called Deacons of Defensive Justice. These men, the Klan, was scared of these black men. Literally, they feared them. They patrolled the neighborhoods, the black communities, because the police wouldn't do it. These men were so powerful that they used their military skills to protect their black community. The Deacons of Defense and Justice was so powerful that when Martin Luther King used to have protest marches, a lot of the police department wouldn't protect them or provide them security. The Deacons of Defense stepped in and provided security. People, you're not going to hear about this because society wants you to think we feared and we were scared and cowards. That's not true. Look them up. Deacons of Defensive Justice, Bogalusa, Louisiana. They were so powerful that they had chapters in Mississippi and Alabama, but they started here in Louisiana. And people, these black men didn't run from the Klan. There's pictures of them in their face going toe to toe. And a lot of Klan were scared of these black men because they were military trained. They know how to use weapons. They know how to do everything. And this is a great part about this history fact. The Deacons of Defense used to get all their weapons from the Port of New Orleans. And I had an opportunity many years ago to sit down and talk to these men. We talk about football players and basketball players, Jim Brown and all this kind of stuff. People, these are real heroes. These are real heroes. People, you got to look them up. History books been lying to us. When they showed the Night Riders and the Klan, they showed black men just shaking and trembling. We never fought back, and that was designed to make us look weak. They're never going to show you a bunch of men that fought their asses toe to toe. They're not going to show you. Go look up the old pictures of these guys. These guys are in these Klan, and it makes me so proud to be a black man. It made me so proud. Because that's what it's all about. People, they're trying to erase this history. They don't want the black kids to know that they were black men who wasn't afraid of the Night Riders, of the Klan. But they want us to think that we were cowards and feared these men. And it's not true. Research it yourself. Do your own history. And you're going to learn about them. We had black men that went toe-to-toe with the Klan. History book would never tell you that. Do your own research. And I'm going to say the name one more time. Deacons of Defense and Justice. When you read it, you're going to have the biggest smile on your face because you're going to be so proud. Check them out.
Insane. First of all, let's back up. Up until 1970, most black families was headed by a man and a woman.
Sure.
Slavery did not destroy the black family.
It did not.
We were married all through slavery, all through civil rights. You don't begin to see the rise of a single black mother until the 1970s. That was not a coincidence.
Late 70s.
Exactly.
Late 70s.
The 70s is when the government came into the black community.
They sold us out.
Yes, Newark, New Jersey, Philly, Baltimore, Detroit, and they deindustrialized the inner city.
Yes, indeed.
They took the jobs out.
Yes.
They took the factories out. And then they went into the high schools and deindustrialized the high school. So guess what?
No
He
trades.
should have graduated with his carpentry license.
Yes.
You should have graduated with your plumbing license.
No
He
trades.
should have graduated with his auto mechanic license. He should have graduated with his HVAC. They stripped all of that, the skills that pay the bills.
Sure.
This was done on purpose to make the black man financially irrelevant to the black woman. To make the 1970s was all about making the black man financially irrelevant to the black woman. And then in the 1980s, they dropped the crack off. CIA, cocaine import agency. Now, black men, jobless after the 70s, you bring me crack. I got a decision.
Is this where the prison industrial complex kicks in?
Absolutely. So I'm either going to smoke the crack and deal with the fact I can't take care of my family, or I'm going to sell the damn crack. That was the 80s. And then they hit us with HIV AIDS at the same time. So the 80s was biological warfare with the AIDS and chemical warfare with the crack, which set us up for the 1990s. Bill Clinton, crime bill. So first time in American history you can go to jail for the rest of your life without having committed a violent crime because you got caught in possession of drugs 3 times in a row. It was a Democratic president, Bill Clinton, who locked up more black men than any president in American history since the end of slavery.
Bro, they showed just the incarceration rates from
the 13th Amendment, the 13th, the documentary.
But even beyond that,
but they showed the incarceration rate, bro, was just exponentially growing,
by hundreds of percent.
So you didn't get a chance to talk about the prison pipeline, you know?
Correct. So let me tie this in. Great point, Queen. So I want us to see how this was systemic. So 1970s, they eliminate the skills that pay the bills and they start pushing college. They push college on us so well that now you have over 2 million American Africans with master's and doctorate degrees who are unemployed. I have lawyers asking me, do I know anybody who's hired for jobs? Lawyers. Because we gave up the skills. Meanwhile, you drive around Jersey City, who do you see building all the new skyscrapers, building all the new buildings? Asian labor, Latino labor, white labor, okay? Almost no blacks. You see that? We swapped out the dirty hands for the white shirts and ties, and we lose it because of it. So then when the 80s came with the crack, that is what most of our problems that we suffer from right now were engineered in the 1980s. They were the aftershock and the collateral damage of the crack. Single mothers, homelessness, teenage pregnancy, hip hop. Not the positive hip hop, but the gangster rap was collateral damage from the era of crack and AIDS. Then the 1990s, when Bill Clinton came with the crime bill, that automatically took the father out the house.
Did y'all know that during the First World War, when the black soldiers were sent away on deployment, they would send money home to their wives, enough so that they didn't have to work? And they didn't. So they became stay-at-home wives, stay-at-home moms. And this pissed some people off, and you know who. Mainly the white women. Because now, all of a sudden, all these black women were staying at home and not working and taking care of their families. And they were pissed because they lost their maids, their cooks, and all the other domestic workers. What had happened was they complained. And so much so, there was a law passed, or a black code that was passed during this time that forced black women to go to work. They had the nerve to complain and call black women loafers and lazy. Sound familiar? Sound like today's times, right? Anyway, black women had to go to work. And if they didn't, they were fined or sent to jail. And I just want to say that it's pretty revolutionary if you decide to rest. So take that PTO, girl. Take that vacation, sis, and rest.
White people, watch this video, and I'll be right back.
He published a book called Race, Tendencies, and Traits of the American Negro, in which he lays out all the numbers, and then he concludes that if we simply avoided allowing black people to have any access to health care, that within 2 or 3 generations, the whole race would die out, and that would solve the race problem in America. When Teddy Roosevelt, 1912, proposed a national health care system, people said no because black people will get it. When Franklin Roosevelt proposed a national health care system, it was the same thing. We don't want black people to get it. When Truman tried it in 47, same thing. Don't want black people to get it. We have to figure out a way to keep black people from using Medicare. And the way that they came up with was to have a 20% hole, a gap in Medicare, so that you had to pay 20% of your doctor's bill and your hospital bill, and that would discourage poor black people from showing up at the hospitals. Nearly 100% of the reason why the United States is the only country in the world that doesn't define healthcare as a right is because of racism. He published a book called Race, Tendencies, and Traits of the American Negro.
How many times do I have to say this? Racism is a detriment to you white folks, poor white folks especially. Because of racism, you poor white folks can't even get good health care. Because they thought if they could deny health care to black people that we would have been eradicated a long time ago. But hey, we still here. And they have not changed the rules. How crazy is that? Even with Social Security, you have to pay 20% because of racism. We keep telling you, BIPOC keep telling you, black people keep telling you, it is not us that makes your life suck. It is those racist politicians and their racist legislation that they think that's going to harm us, but harms you at the same time. And they don't care if it harms you. They don't give a shit. And then you continue to vote against your own interest. All because a bunch of rich white people told y'all to hate black people because black people are doing stuff to you as a whole. And we're not, because we don't control shit. We don't control the healthcare system. We don't control Social Security. We don't control your wages. We don't control shit. But they continue to tell you that it's us. So you turn your focus on us and harass the shit out of us for no fucking reason, when we have no power to affect your life as a whole community. Pay attention.
Welcome back. Now, what we are hearing here is an important reminder that history is not just a collection of dates and names. The decisions made decades ago can have consequences that continue for generations. When people talk about inequality today, the conversation sometimes focuses entirely on individual choices. But this commentary is asking us to look at the bigger picture. What policies exist? Who benefited from them? Who was excluded? And what happened to those communities afterward? That doesn't mean individual responsibility doesn't matter. It means we should understand the environment in which those individual choices are being made. Another part that really stands out is the discussion about resistance. Black Americans were not simply passive victims of discrimination. Through American history, people organized, protested, defended their communities, created businesses, challenged unjust laws, and demanded equal treatment. The Beacons for Defense and Justice are one example of that complicated history. Their story reminds us that communities facing racial violence sometimes organized to protect themselves when they believed authorities were failing to provide adequate protection. That is an important part of history because it shows both the injustice people faced and the determination they showed in confronting it. The discussion becomes even more uncomfortable when it addresses slavery. There is a tendency to discuss slavery in a very distant and sanitized way, as if it were simply another chapter in a textbook. But slavery involved families being separated, people being denied freedom, and human beings being treated as property. Understanding that reality isn't about creating hatred towards people today. It's about understanding what actually happened, and you cannot properly discuss the consequences of history if you refuse to honestly discuss the history itself. The video also makes a powerful argument about the idea of racial progress. Yes, America has changed dramatically. Laws have changed, segregation was challenged, and civil rights protections expanded, and Black Americans have achieved incredible accomplishments across politics, businesses, entertainment, education, science, and countless other fields. But progress does not necessarily mean every problem disappears. Some forms of discrimination can change shape over time. That is why examining institution policies, economic opportunities, education, housing, and the injustice system, the question should not simply be, is racism still exactly the same as it was decades ago? The better question is, where do equal outcomes come from? And what can society do about them? The discussion about the economy and inner cities is another area that deserves serious attention. The video connects economic decline, the loss of industrial jobs, changes in education, criminal justice policies, incarceration. These are complicated issues, and there isn't one single explanation for everything that happened in American cities. But one thing is clear. When communities lose stable employment, education opportunities, and economic investments, the consequences can be enormous, and those consequences don't disappear overnight. I also think the point about healthcare is worth considering. When access to healthcare is unequal, the consequences don't stop at one racial group. Poor communities of every background can suffer when healthcare system fails to provide adequate access. That is why the video argues that racism doesn't only damage the people directly targeted by discrimination, it also weakens society more broadly by creating systems that fail to serve everyone fairly. That makes this bigger conversation than race alone. It becomes a conversation about what kind of society people want to build. Then you come to the question of reconciliation and reparations. This is obviously one of the most controversial subjects in America. People have very different opinions about what reparation should mean, who should qualify, how they should be funded, and whether they are appropriate generation after slavery. But regardless of where someone stands on reparations, the underlying question is worth discussing. How does a nation deal honestly with historical wrongdoing? The comparison with Germany is being used to make the argument that acknowledging historical wrongdoing can be part of national healing. Whether someone agrees with that comparison or not, the broader principle is worth thinking about. A country doesn't become weaker simply because it acknowledges painful chapter of its history. Sometimes confronting difficult history can actually help a society understand itself better. What I take away from this entire discussion is that history should not be used simply as a weapon to attack people today. Instead, history should be used as a tool for understanding. We can recognize the progress America has made while still acknowledging the injustice that occurred. We can celebrate the achievements of Black Americans while also discussing the barriers that existed, and what we can talk about historical responsibility without telling young people that they are personally guilty for something they did not do. There is a difference between personal guilt and historical understanding. At the end of the day, uncomfortable history doesn't become less important because it makes us uncomfortable. If anything, those are the moments when serious conversations are often most necessary. The goal should not be to create division between Americans. The goal should be to understand how the country arrived at where it is today and ask what lessons can be learned from that history. Because if we only remember that parts of history that makes us feel good, we aren't really learning history. And if we want a better future, we need the courage to examine the past honestly, even when the past is painful, complicated, and uncomfortable. That is my reaction to this discussion. Let me know what you think in the comments. Do you believe America has fully confronted the difficult parts of its racial history, or there is still more to be done? If you've enjoyed this commentary, please remember to subscribe, like, and share the video. This is Trevor Commentaries, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye for now.